Helene opened the door to the pub with a crash, her lips moving. Brows knitted, she forced her way to the bar stool and dug her nails into her palm. Despite it being a weeknight, the hunting horn had plenty of patrons. A table of painters, their clothes still spattered with the detritus of their work, sat arguing about some new exhibition. A group of textile labourers chatted in Italian and shared a bottle of wine. She spied a group of well-dressed aristocrats who kept casting looks around and then at each other as if sharing a private joke. A thought struck her, an answer she should have said, and she bared her teeth and placed a hand on her forehead. The argument had pursued her, no matter how fast she walked. The most stinging comments rebounded in her head. She winced at the recall and drummed her knuckles on the bar top. A patron nudged her to reach for a drink and she blinked. A glance over her shoulder reassured her and she slowed her breathing. She felt someone staring through the tobacco smoke, adjusted the bar stool and smiled back. A tingling began all over her skin. Felt good. The babel of English speakers roared like a weir. Patrons clustered the bar and the regulars got served first, but she savoured the moment, placing her hands on the tabletop. They had all come seeking the same thing. The heavy oak door swung open and she turned to look. She offered a soft curse at seeing no one, and her lips parted. Clutching a fist to her chest, she squeezed her body tight and then released. Out on her own for the first time since moving here. She thought of the last words said to her and curled her lip, then shook herself gently. The fraying cover on the stool, the unwashed glasses behind the bar, and the unswept floor all made her turn up her nose. But she didn't move. The tobacco pouch drew some glances which she savoured and put her shoulders back. Filling her pipe, she looked up to see the man who'd been staring, standing there offering her a match. The glow from the flame accentuated his strong jawline, and she noticed he had long eyelashes. A lightness filled her chest, and she leaned forward. He closed the gap, extending the match. Drawing in the smoke felt meditative, and they held eye contact. Her hand stopped shaking. She forced herself to relax. "Thanks," she said. Her voice felt loud and guttural, despite all the noise around her. A game of darts had begun in one corner. "What's your poison?" he asked in a deep voice. Helene blinked. "What are you drinking?" he added. She smiled nervously. "Beer," she said. She had brought her purse, heedless of the consequences, but it seemed like she wouldn't need it. The newcomer wore a magnificent top hat, a velvet frock coat, and a waistcoat. Everything had been immaculately tailored and fitted, accentuating his physique. A handsome fellow, his beard proved the finishing blow, the antithesis of Moore's beard. His beard had been neatly trimmed. The beer arrived and she drank it down without looking away. He looked her up and down unashamedly as he finished his drink. "My, but you're a pretty thing." Helene wanted to burst out laughing, but it made her feel warm at the same time. She had put on her best dress, and someone had taken note. After classical references and sweet nothings, it tickled her greatly to be flattered so nakedly. Her face felt stretched from smiling. "I'm Charles," he said, hitting her with a waft of shaving lotion as he leaned in to speak. A small voice in her head protested she had no business flirting with a bourgeois man, the enemy, but she ignored it. She had risked ruining everything, and now she just wanted to be seen, to be desired, to be wanted. "I'm Helene," she said. He took her hand and kissed it, looking her in the eyes. The touch of his hands and his lips sent electricity through her. She realized with a jolt that she hadn't introduced herself in years. Before taking this job, she'd been someone's daughter, and now always accompanied the family, so existed an extension of them. Everyone always turned to look at Jenny first for their finely tailored clothes and elegant bearing. Now she'd gone out into the night alone. If it hadn't been for the argument, she probably never would have gone. "Never seen you in here before, Helene," he said. "Where have they been hiding you?" Helene got a wild idea in her head. She could invent a whole new life, a whole new story, and no one would be any the wiser. But then Jim, the local butcher, saw her and waved, squashing that idea flat. She finished the pipe and emptied the bowl into the ashtray. "I work for a family on Dean Street," she said. "They need my help a lot of the time." "Lucky family," he said, leaning in. "What about you?" she asked. "Did you come with friends?" "No," he said, fixing her with that stare again. It gave her goosebumps. "I'm very glad I didn't." "This is a dump, isn't it?" he added, looking around. "Yes," she agreed with a chuckle. It felt so good to be out alone that she would have accepted most places, but it amused her to hear him say it. "Let's go to the music hall," he said. "There's a show you must see to believe it." He winked at her. Helene finished her drink, heat rising to her face. People loved telling her about her thoughtfulness, her reliability, and her honesty, but he wanted to have fun. Why bother moving to a great city when you just saw four walls? Out of habit, she thought of Jenny and then remembered. She nodded, senses heightened. Charles excused himself, brushed her arm, and crossed the bar. I'd be careful. Helene turned to see the woman standing behind her, a redhead. She had thick makeup and dishevelled hair. Jenny had warned Helene that these two signs indicated the woman might be a streetwalker. What? She snapped. Fellas like that come down here to slum it. Best be careful. Helene frowned. This stranger spoke in an insolent way. Another warning sign, but Jenny warned her they tended to lean on slang around foreigners to feel superior. I'm always careful, she said shortly. Typical divide and rule tactics, she thought. She probably sees herself as a momentarily penniless aristocrat, and that I'm beneath such a man. Find her the right man, she'll have a tiara on her head in no time. Never seen him in here before, said the redhead. I know all the locals. Don't know him. That worries me. Helene stood up. I'm tired of being told what to do, she said. The redhead's eyes widened. I tried to do the right thing earlier, and it got me shouted at. Mind your own business. Charles returned and offered his arm. Helene broke her clay pipe into pieces, threw it on the fireplace, and took Charles's arm, staring triumphantly at the woman as she did. She didn't remember anything about the show, but he made her laugh the entire time with comments about the performers. He looked at her more than the stage and didn't talk too fast nor slow down the degrees so many needed to help. They laughed so much that the theatre manager kicked them out. Still laughing, they walked down the Strand before Helene half stumbled. He reached out, pulled her up, and kissed her. She could still taste his tobacco, and she surprised herself by pushing her tongue into his mouth. They stopped into another pub for more drinks. The night stretched ahead, and she wanted it to go on forever. Maybe the sun would never come up, and this would be the rest of her life. Her band played, and she jumped up, only to wobble as she did so. The dim lights surrounding the bar began to blur, and she stumbled over her feet. As the music surged, Helene tried to compose herself, but her limbs wouldn't obey, and it felt like walking through a midden. She closed her eyes and opened them to find Charles helping her over the threshold of a dark room. Tumbling onto a soft bed, she reached for him and pulled him close. Her head swam, but her hands fumbled for him. Oblivion swallowed her. Helene gazed at herself in the mirror as she finished her toilet. Her eyes looked red, this time from lack of sleep instead of drunkenness. She thought of that night often as the last truly carefree night. Since then, the days had been long, but the year passed in a twinkling. The bell rang for dinner and she ran from the bedroom to the kitchen, then the basket. Her son, Friedrich, continued to slumber. He would always cry when she went out of his line of vision. She stroked his face, smiling, and picked up the tray with shaking hands. Casting another look at him, she pushed the door open with her hip. He continued to sleep, but his face worried her. He looked thin. It had been a difficult birth, and he'd been born small. For the first few nights, she stayed up to watch him sleep, terrified he wasn't breathing right. The murmur of conversation drifted through like a warm breeze. Already she heard more, warming to a point. No, no, my friend. The right man could not have halted the March days. Greater forces than one man had put that into effect. But Hegel said, protested the other speaker, more scoffed, cutting him off. Hegel has a faith in the system and the state that is almost touching in its naivete. Helene smiled and then walked into the room. Everyone looked up at her approach. The happy scene gave her a twinge of guilt and her stomach hurt. Both Jenny and Moore looked in their element as host and hostess. Dear Jenny smiled a strained smile. Moore, the family nickname for the master of the house, Karl Marx, continued to hold forth, eyes burning like coals in his beautiful olive-skinned face framed by luxurious hair. The fact that Jenny showed little rancor towards Helene, despite the wrong she'd done to her, made Helene feel even worse. At least with Moore, she'd quarrelled with him and then healed the hurt with kindness when the baby was born. Mr. Engels, dressed in tweed and a new cravat, greeted her with a wave. Sitting up tall, his eyes sparkled at the debate taking place, and he fidgeted in his seat in anticipation of his turn. Then her eyes fell upon the guest sitting at Karl's right hand. The tray rattled and she swayed. Janie appeared by her side. Are you all right? She spoke to her in German, and Helene clenched her teeth. Janie meant well, but it made her feel like a hayseed. The last thing she needed right now was that monster staring at her. Quite well, she said loudly in English. Just the vapours, she lied in a lower voice. It stung, but it would get Jenny off her back. She served the tea, the hosts first, and then the guests sitting to the left and right. Despite her best efforts, the cups rattled in their saucers as she set them down. Jenny took over the pouring of the tea without comment, and Helene managed to keep her composure until the smell of shaving lotion made her knees wobble. She stumbled back into the kitchen, half dropping the tray on the table. Her head swam. The smell brought her tumbling back to that ill-fated night. Her eyes hardened. Not a word since he disappeared that morning, and now he did this? Friedrich awoke with a cry. Helene scooped him up and held him tight. There, she whispered in English. The door from the parlour opened, and she shrank back, covering her son's body with hers. Jenny stood there. I can take him, she said, holding her arms. He'll be all right soon, said Helene with a wan smile. Dear Jenny, always trying to do right, like a dagger to her heart. See to your guests. She hugged the boy close, as if holding him tight she could draw him back inside, away from the threats of this world. The thought of waiting on the guest after everything he'd put her through turned her stomach. This would be one humiliation she wouldn't suffer. She slipped her hand down as if to support Friedrich and pinched his leg. He wailed louder. Oh dear, I think some colic, she said aloud. Take him, said Jenny. I'll serve the guests. Helene fled upstairs and lay down on the bed. The baby looked up, his bewildered eyes still brimmed with tears and his fists bunched. Helene stared back with a lump in her throat. The infant brushed her face with his little hands as if clearing the tears would lighten her heart. It did no good. She kissed his leg where she'd left a mark and begged his forgiveness before feeding him. Sleep wouldn't come, and the conversation drifted up in snatches. Helene found herself listening out for Charles's voice. She hugged her son, sniffling. He pulled away, but she held him tighter. She had fallen asleep by the time the family retired for the night, and the empty pantry gave her the chance to go to market the next day. Reassuring Jenny that the baby had quite recovered, she placed Friedrich in a sling and set out. Moore had left early for the British Library. The weight of her son felt reassuring. The vendors had begun to set up their stalls, the greengrocer calling out to passers-by as he arranged the produce. It never failed to shock her how early they arrived and how many in London made a living as the wealthy slept. Once she'd woken in the early hours of the morning, the city cloaked in darkness, and beheld a coster setting up. He'd stayed until nightfall the next day. With a city teeming with customers, and most people one bad day away from penury, the costers couldn't afford to risk missing foot traffic. The widow, Mrs. Pike, a lace-maker who lived one street down, placed her wares on her doorstep. Helene took a deep breath and widened her stance. She'd bought all her produce when she heard her name called. She froze, rooted to the spot. Had to have imagined it. No point in turning. A hand grabbed her arm. She swung around. Charles stood there, deep shadows under his eyes. Helene. She recoiled and took a step back. Her son stirred and she put her arms around him. What are you doing here? Why have you come back to torment me? He chewed his lip. I came last night. She crossed her arms and scowled. As a guest for me to serve. You had one night and then you abandoned me. I woke up in the lodging house alone. You didn't call. You didn't write. I was alone. We are alone. Now leave us alone. Her voice raised and people began to look over. Charles gripped her arm and pulled her into an alley. Helene pulled away and fled. Soho alleys were like living in a coal mine lined with soot and so high that sunlight couldn't break inside. Refuse had been piled up in heaps and Helene dodged around them as she ran. Charles pursued her, his feet clattering, cursing as he tripped over some piles. An urchin ran out in front of Helene, forcing her to skid to a halt to avoid falling over him. Charles collided with her and he used the momentum to push her against a wall. Helene gasped and then shuddered. Her instinct to lash out was checked by the prospect of angering him. What if he turned violent? The baby! Charles backed up, but he didn't release his hold on her arm. His breath hissed into the gloom. Listen to me, blast you! Just let me talk! Helene's throat felt thick and she sagged. She had protected her boy for so long, and now this. Talk then, she said dully. I came to Soho that night looking for companionship, he began. My wife and I had been going through some difficulties, but things improved at home and I didn't find myself down here. But then I found myself called down here for work and I began to think about that night. I tried going back to the pub, but I never saw you. Helene curled her fingers and stood stiffly. Did he think a woman with a baby would be making merry in the local pub? How could she have ever given him 5 minutes, let alone do what she did? What are you saying? She said in a low voice. I don't come here to expect a reconciliation. Helene scoffed and then grimaced at the unfamiliar word. He kept talking. I would like to give our child a home, he said. Helene squinted. What makes you think you can take him? He scoffed. You're a domestic, Helene. What sort of future can you offer him? Helene glared at him harshly. He truly believed everything in this world had its price. You mentioned a wife, she said stiffly. What of her? He lowered his eyes. My wife is a practical woman. Our attempts to have a child were unsuccessful, but now it is clear the fault isn't mine. We have come to an understanding. I have always done my duty in the household. He fidgeted with the lapels of his expensive clothes and cleared his throat. We agree that one must keep up appearances. My family must have an heir, and she is prepared to accept and raise the child as ours. It is the least she can do. Helene felt nauseous. A swell of pity rose in her chest for this poor woman who had to accept philandering as a consequence of her failing. Why did you come to dinner yesterday? She said, grinding her teeth. He looked wounded. I told you, business brought me back here. I had tried all other ways, and a mutual acquaintance introduced me to your master, who extended an invitation. It would be rude not to accept. Profound silence fell. Helene let it stew. Let him choke on it. Well, he said after a while, come on, old girl. Helene looked him right in the eye. He flinched, but finally had the grace to look away. No, she said slowly and clearly. When you left me, everyone thought Mr. Marx was the father of my child. They still think that, as I could not prove otherwise. As for me, I have decided he has no father. I have chores to run and a son to raise. You wanted to speak, and you spoke. Now, get out of my way. She walked back the way she'd come, head held high. Charles called her name once, and she walked faster. He walked after her, and a crowd of children flocked from one of the slum houses. They blocked his path, begging for charity. Perhaps they'd heard the conversation and thought him an easy mark. Once back on Dean Street, her shoulders slumped and she sobbed. The affair with Moore had begun when Jenny travelled to Germany. Helene called it off, and he grew angry. Her anger from the row had robbed her of her senses and caution. Helene lay awake for a long time that night. Friedrich fussed next to her, a continuation of the behaviour he'd exhibited all day. The years to come loomed ahead like a chasm. Charles's comment about what kind of life she could provide stung most, but it reminded her even more of the small moments, the sideways looks and barely audible sighs that were all too small to be called out. Death by 1,000 cuts. Both her master and mistress stirred, and she got up, taking her son into the scullery to comfort him. She sat against the wall, the cold serving as smelling salts to stop her from dozing. A thought struck her, and she lifted her head. What if Charles tried to take the boy? Her child, raised in the upper-class system, would be a fate worse than death. She went back to the bedroom to look at her sleeping employers. Any other family would have thrown her out with neither a farthing nor a reference or recommendation, but they stood by her. They valued allies more than social convention. She would take Charles's advice, but not in the way he anticipated. Father unnamed? Helene looked for Jenny for reassurance and got a small nod. Mr. Engels sat to her left, his commanding presence giving her further reassurance. Everyone had sat up straighter upon seeing him, and his superb command of English magnified his warm reception. She noted dust on photographs of the vicar's family. Either he had a lazy housekeeper or he didn't let her in frequently. The parlour dwarfed the apartment she had shared with the Marx family. Such a large space for a man who only had to labour one day a week, and only for a few hours. She thought back to the street vendors setting up their wares on Dean Street. That is right, she said in a clear voice. The vicar looked up from the birth certificate to cast a look at the two pupils sitting next to him, a man and a woman. They looked to be in their 50s, fat, well-fed, and all wearing splendid clothes. The vicar wore steel spectacles that kept sliding down his narrow nose. Helene found herself thinking all three looked like fine pink sausages dressed in pastry castings. What is your relationship to this young lady, Mrs. Max? Said the vicar. Marx, corrected Jenny. She is my housekeeper. And what is your husband's occupation? Asked the man sitting to the left of the vicar. He's a journalist, said Jenny. She said it very proudly, and Helene smiled. No man had opened her eyes to the true state of the world more. Is the father dead? Inquired the lady in a gentler voice. Jenny flushed. No, she said quietly, but the boy needs to be placed with a good family. And above all these things, put on charity, which is the bond of perfectness, recited the vicar. That we will do. He said it fast, so Helene didn't grasp the full meaning, but she understood her son would have a new home. Her stomach lurched, and she tightened her grip so hard he whimpered. She forced herself to relax her grip, lower lip quivering. I'd like him to keep his name, she blurted out. It is a fine name, and it suits him very well. It is a very fine name indeed, said Mr. Engels with a wink, smiling as if he were the father himself. The boy had taken his first name. Helene smiled and felt her spirits lift. We shall, said the vicar, pushing the glasses back up his nose. The paperwork has been drafted. After an examination by the doctor, he'll be sent to Hatfield. Helene blinked. Hatfield? Where is that? A fine village outside the city, said the vicar. He placed the paperwork along with the quill on the table. What of the family? Asked Helene. Jenny nudged her. What sort of people are they? The woman went to speak, but the vicar silenced her with a gesture. They are good Christian people and dear friends of the church. Your son is most fortunate. His new father will be a lawyer. Helene flinched and got to her feet. She pictured her son grown, dressed in the same clothes as his father, and stalking through the streets of Soho in search of prey, slipping a ring off his finger and into a pocket. I shall be going. Helene, sit down, said Jenny, in a tone so unlike her that Helene sat down without intending to. Is something wrong? Asked the vicar, his face reddening. He turned to face Mr. Engels. Sir, can you translate for this young woman? This I do not want, stammered Helene. She felt their eyes boring into her. Jenny, furious. Mr. Engels crinkled his eyes, head slightly on one side. The vicar, shifting and grimacing. The other two members of the church looked at her through narrowed eyes. Katharina, Helene's older sister, had gone through this once too. But Katharina had been trapped in a small part of the world with small minds. Everyone sent her away in disgrace to have her baby, and she accepted it. It would never have occurred to her to say no, to stand her ground, to explain. Helene had moved to London. She too deserved what it promised. Everyone. She clasped her hands together, ignoring the nausea rising in her gorge and her dry mouth. Baring her teeth, she tried to find the right words, but they wouldn't come. I want my son to go to a good family. The vicar stole a glance at his companions. Your son will go to a lawyer, he enunciated slowly. Lawyers make a lot of money. They will give your son a good life. Helene winced. He thought her a blockhead who simply didn't understand. She pushed her knees together. Jenny stared, lost for words. Silence filled the vicarage study room. Only the ticking clock could be heard. That is not the kind of family I am wanting, said Helene with a great effort. Her fingers felt cold. She picked up the basket containing her son. She curtsied, chills racking her body, and opened the door. Jenny got to her feet as if in a dream and curtsied in turn. Thank you for your very kind time, she stammered. Mr. Engels had another appointment, so he hailed a cab and took Helene's hand. What did you mean by a good family, my dear? He asked in English. I meant a working family with good ethics, the kind of family we know will be the backbone of the world to come. Of course, without those people's eyes boring into her, the words tripped off her tongue in English like a brook. He nodded thoughtfully, raised his hat, and climbed into the cab. Jenny usually would have hailed a carriage, but she stormed ahead, Helene struggling in her wake. Emerging from the sanctuary of the vicarage, they plunged into the labyrinthine streets of Soho. Helene cast a look over her shoulder. She'd never be caught off guard again. A sharp pain emerged in her chest. Of all people, she thought Helene would understand. She shared the detestation of the idle class. Jenny slowed as they reached 28 Dean Street. Helene looked at the warm bricks, battered by missiles from revellers, riots, and times gone by. It reassured her to know that the apartment had seen all this. Helene, said Jenny spoke slowly, looking down at her own feet. You are very dear to me, but there are limits to what I can endure. Helene became very still. Jenny hadn't called her Lechin or Nim, their nickname for her. The cries from the local pub felt very loud in her ears. The sound seemed to mock her and chastise her. A moment's indiscretion and women suffered for years to come. Jenny went on, still not looking at her. It is not easy being married. I've been through a great deal, and I appreciate your part in it. A warm glow rose in Helene's chest. Jenny meant to refer to the time they did not pay her a wage for several weeks. When the money came, she refused it, but Jenny wouldn't hear of it. But while I married Karl, Helene bit her lip. Jenny seldom called her husband by his first name. I did not marry you. She looked at Helene. Her eyelids had turned red. You must find a home for the boy. I cannot look on him any longer and be reminded. She turned and went into the house without saying anything more. Foolish to think she would understand as Helene did. True, she had children of her own, but the boy wasn't her child. She had been polishing the silver when Jenny called for her. Mr. Engels sat waiting in the parlour. I have been thinking about what you said. Helene started and blinked. She looked around. Would a parish beadle come to take the boy away? But Mr. Engels smiled. I have found the kind of family you wanted. Helene looked for Jenny, but she had already gone. She took a step back and pressed her lips together. Could she do this? Had she made the right choice? Mr. Engels walked over. You may take as long as you need to say goodbye to him. I have a carriage waiting outside to take us to the working family who will adopt him. What if they send him back? What if they're not good people? What if he grows up to resent me? The protest roared through Helene's head like a train. She stepped into the other room. She looked down at her son, who gazed up delightedly. But then she saw everything else around. A kitchen instead of a room where he could play. An old basket instead of a pram. Nothing belonged to him, and he would soon come to know it. She took a deep breath and kissed him. Closing her eyes, she pictured his future again, but instead saw him at a picket line on marches. What a beautiful boy, Mr. Engel said, peering into the basket. He stood perfectly straight with his hands in line with the seam of his trousers. The little boy regarded him thoughtfully and waved his hand as if in salute. Well met, young man, said Mr. Engels. He has the look of his father, he went on. Do not blush, my dear, he chided Helene. Shame is something the bourgeois use when it suits them. Stops people from speaking out when it matters most. Do you need more time? Helene looked at her son, then out the window. Even if Charles did come back, he wouldn't find anything here, and little Friedrich would make a new world from his new life. She had suffered the consequences of a choice made in haste, but by sticking to her principles, she had brought Friedrich, her son, the chance to tear down the structure that his father sought to uphold. She smiled, despite the tears forming in her eyes. No, I'm ready now.